Good evening, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, Simon. How are you?
I'm fantastic. We're going to have a look at season 3, but we don't just have a gap now like most podcasts do. They take time off and go and relax. We have actually got new recruits on board to replace our old deep dive team. Do you think we'll put them to bed now, or do you think we'll get them back in at a future stage, our old deep dive team? Because I like them.
I'm sure they'll come back, and we owe them that because they've
Yeah.
actually been tremendous, and the range of subjects they've covered has been hugely interesting for me. You know, as one of the hosts, I've found it very, very interesting to listen to it. So I very much want them back for sure.
Yeah. And what we've got coming out this week on Wednesday is the start of our Charles Manson season, which is specifically about Manson and his horrific crimes back in the 60s and the whole cult that following and all the rest of it. And I've listened to the first episode that you and I are going to have a chat about later this week. And it's fascinating to go back that far. It goes back into his mother and his grandmother and the family. And when you see the circumstances and you start to think about when he was born in the 30s, going back 2 generations from that, the seeds were sown a long, long time before Charles saw the light of day, weren't they?
Absolutely. But of course, you and I both know that when you come across these people and when you dig down, I'm not talking about Charles Manson, but other killers and other notorious violent criminals, when you scrape at the surface, you usually find that there's been very early indicators and very early clues.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to the Manson series. The thing that's always fascinated me about Manson is not the crimes, but the fact that over years and years, decades following the crimes, he still held almost a Svengali-like control over the women, over the young women who were art and part in his crimes. And that to me is that degree of control over that time and at that distance. Remember, he was nowhere near them, so it wasn't any kind of personal thing. That to me was extraordinary. And I'm looking forward to that being fully explored in this series. But great credit, our producer, director, Chris. This is a special project for him. All the time I've known Chris, not as long as you, but the years I've known Chris, he's always been interested in the Manson case.
Yeah.
He went over and actually walked the ground, which is an important thing to do if you're doing cold cases, is to walk the ground. And he did that, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, he was over there a couple of years ago, and maybe we'll have some stuff on the website. I'm sure we'll have some stuff on the website in the next week or so, because Chris took footage over there, took photographs. He did a lot of work over there, because as you say, it was a project that he was very interested in. So really looking forward to it, because you only get the press, don't you? You only get the headlines, but when you start to listen to his story, a lot of things start to slot into place, and how manipulative he was as a child as well, to survive, to try and survive as an infant almost. So really looking forward to it, starting on Wednesday this week, Tom, here on Crime Time Inc. The other things that are happening this week is on Thursday night, we've got the second of our live shows, this time in the Three Craws in Jordan Hill on Crow Road, 8 o'clock kickoff. There's still a few seats available because it's a public house and restaurant. They can expand it to suit. And I think they've done that. And Jane's coming through again, Jane Hamilton.
She certainly is. I'll be seeing Jane tomorrow, actually, at another event that she's at. And we're looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to it. I've not been through there before, so I know it's an old haunt of yours, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, and hope that because it's an old haunt of yours, that generosity might compel you to buy me a drink.
Well, we'll see about that. And you'll be driving, of course, so it'll be a Coke.
Well, not necessarily. I'll bring a carry-out bottle that I can put it in and take home. That's what we do in Edinburgh.
Oh, I don't find all the tricks in Edinburgh. And Tom, the other thing this week is that the live show that we did in the Mitchell Library will be going up this week as well as a podcast. So that's with Jane, live audience, questions, all the rest of it. It was quite a good night, and I think it'll make an interesting podcast.
That was good fun.
What's interesting when you look at our back catalogue is that the 3 seasons are distinct, aren't they? The 3 seasons that we've done so far are quite distinct. Starting off with George Barnsley way back over a year ago, when it was guests that we had in all the time and all different subjects covered. And then the season there, the season 2, was a kind of mix of that, with you and I covering topics over and above that. And then this season has been our deep dive team going out and looking at cases every day. So we've had a podcast, daily podcast, and a roundup by you on the Sunday. And here we are at season 4, and I'm not sure what we've got in the pipeline now. But I've enjoyed the variety of it, Tom, like you.
I have, and sometimes when I've seen the programme of what they've been talking about, I thought, how did they find that? How on earth did they find that? But I've learned a lot, and I've found it fascinating. I really am.
It's good because it keeps us engaged. So I hope that comes across to the audience as well. Yeah. What I've done here is broken down the topics that we've had over the season 4, Tom, and that's quite difficult because we've had such a wide range. But I'll start off with the most obvious one if you want. Probably every week we've looked at a serial killer, either here in the UK, in America, of course, and Australia, because I was in Australia during the course of this season. And we've gone from every extreme here with serial killers. It's a real eye-opener, isn't it?
It is. Thankfully, we don't get many serial killers that we know of in this country. And I'm always keen to say that we know of. Because it does concern me. This business about, we have so many homicides and we do this and do that. And I'm always thinking, but what about the ones we don't know about? It always still strikes me. And of course, I was either in the wrong place at the right time or the right place at the wrong time, not sure. But I was involved in the 3 worst serial killers in the 1970s, 1980s. Robert Black, Angus Sinclair and Peter Tobin, to a greater or lesser degree. I mean, I was involved quite a lot with Robert Black, a lot with Angus Sinclair, and wrote the book on that, of course. And then I had a small walk-on part in the early stages of the Tobin one. But so I was involved in all 3, and it's always fascinated me that these 3 men who had no connection with each other, none whatsoever, despite the conspiracies, they did not, that they should be operating at roughly the same time and in roughly the same area in a very small country like Scotland, over the central belt of Scotland. So, that's always still fascinates me as how that came about.
It's incredible, Tom, because over the course of the season, we've looked at all these. We've looked at Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, it just goes on and on. Australia, Paul Stephen Hay. And what's striking about them is that they're usually territorial, but they're widespread. And as you say, over vast areas and different geographies, different MOs. And here we had 3 serial killers working in the central belt of Scotland primarily.
Yes,
it's astonishing.
And overlapping by a few years. But I mean, I remember discussing it with people from the FBI, and they said it was statistically highly improbable. And that's as near as they come to saying impossible. They said it was statistically highly improbable that these 3 men were not connected in some way because of the timing, because of the proximity, and because just the unlikelihood in such a small area of central Scotland. And yet the improbable happened because there was no connection. But as I've said before, looking at this as I have over a long period of time, they had common factors. Firstly, they had all been born into difficult circumstances, and we'll be talking about this in the coming weeks with what we're going to do about the Manson case. We'll be talking about this. And they were all born into circumstances, as I've said before, where violence was an everyday occurrence, where it was almost like a currency, where it was normalised, that you did not have an argument with someone, you hit them, or you were hit. As a child, as a young adult, violence was normalised. And then, of course, disgracefully, the victims were all young women or girls who were vulnerable. And there was in all of them a contempt for women, a deep-seated misogyny, a disregard for anything to do with women. So that's what they had in common. And of course, the other thing, purely practical, they all had modern, reliable methods of transport. Now, it sounds daft. I talk about, one of the great factors in Angus Sinclair, the world's end killer, offending was the fact that he owned a modern camper van. It sounds so puerile, but that was the truth of it. That gave him the ability to actually carry out the crimes he did.
A couple of things from that, Tom, just to replies, which is what we're doing here. was the reasons why the 70s and 80s nurtured this global phenomena of the serial killer, although it was the FBI that labelled it that back in the day. Over the course of the season, we've touched on some of the factors that were behind that, such as media interest in it and the publicity that attracted. And it's common knowledge and it spreads. Transport, you mentioned there, for having access to transport. Well, the road system, we were building motorways and interstates, and it was much easier to travel large distances throughout the country.
That's certainly true in America. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Family instability and the breakdown in community. The world was getting bigger then. People were no longer restricted to their own communities, and things were opening up across the country and across the world. People having to move for employment and whatnot, and young people travelling the world as backpackers, etc. It was almost bait for serial killers, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Extremely vulnerable people who there was nobody going to miss them. And nobody going to raise the alarm, and nobody going to start looking for them in a hurry because they didn't know where they were. That's right.
Tom, I was chatting to our friends over the Atlantic at Small Town Dicks during the week, the researchers, because we're both doing some work with them just now. And an old episode came up. We were chatting about when I had quoted you. I don't know how that could happen, but I'd mentioned your, not theory, your opinion about two types of detective, the marathon and the sprinter. And they loved that. They're still talking about it now because I told them about it. And I'm thinking about these serial killers here. It takes its toll and has an impact on the investigators as well, doesn't it?
Very much so. And somebody was asking me, I was at a book thing, and they said, how did you remain semi-normal? I mean, that was a great compliment to me. I thought,
the emphasis being semi.
Yes, semi-normal when you're involved in these things. And I said, there is nothing, absolutely nothing like being involved in a murder squad when you're hot on the heels of somebody. It's an exhilarating feeling. I've never been a top-level competitive sportsman, but it strikes me it must be like being a part of a winning team. We've got this tremendous sense of purpose. But I said, on the other side of the coin, to be involved in one of these long-running investigations where there's nothing happening day to day, and you've just got to keep your head down and keep going.
Plodding.
That requires a different form of discipline. And I worked with some people who were excellent at that. They just kept going and they never lost sight of the goal. They kept their head down, and neither did they ever jeopardise their standards. They never let their standards fall. And they were true marathon runners. They were ultra marathon runners because they just kept going. And I've tried to mention them in my book about the World's End and just draw attention to what fantastic duty they did, because it was much easier on the sprint than it was on the long distance.
Here's a question for you, Tom. Let's say the old-fashioned incident room with the carousel and the cards and all the rest of it, everything's written down for reference. How much of that information in there, percentage-wise, is actually useless? And how much of it is pertinent when you finally catch the murderer or whatever the major investigation is? How much of it is pertinent to the case moving forward?
Tiny percentage. And sometimes the culprit will come from something absolute left field. Your whole carousel and all your filing system is worthless. Absolutely worthless, But remember that the admin system is not just there to point to the culprit. It's there to eliminate others. It's there to eliminate others. And we've discussed this before. Once you've got the guy in the cells, then it all becomes easy. Everything unfolds. Of course, it's obvious. It's obvious. It wasn't so obvious 24 hours before.
That's what I was thinking with the marathon runner and you saying keeping your standards up, because you don't know which snippet is going to be useful. So every single statement you take, every witness you speak to, every action you take, and everything you do to eliminate someone has to be done to that same high standard.
And that's why when you do finally get a result in one of these long-running investigations, invariably you get calls from retired detectives who have been in these squads maybe years before. I get dozens. When we finished up The World's End and I was leading the end of the investigation, I got dozens of phone calls saying, "Hi, Tom, how you getting on? Long time no see. How you getting on? Yeah, that's great. A really good result with The World's End. Really good. I'm really, really pleased. Really pleased." Now, I don't want to intrude. I don't want to ask any questions I can't. But could you just tell me, was he on the system?
Yes.
But what they're really asking is, did I miss him? Did I miss him? Was it my fault? Did I miss him? Did I miss him? And I knew it was coming. So, and I'd say, listen, I know why you're phoning me. Delighted to hear from you. No, he wasn't on the system, and there's no issue. And you could hear the relief.
Yeah.
This is people that have been retired for 30 years, some of them.
Yeah.
You could hear them saying, don't want to know anything else. Best of luck. Excellent. Blah, blah, blah. You know.
Tom, what hindsight has given us is a different perspective. And I can say this to you, and whether our listeners believe me or not, it's neither here nor there. They might think I'm bound to say this. But now with hindsight, looking at cold cases being solved now with new developments in DNA and other technologies, we were good at this. I don't mean you and I mean the police were good at these major investigations.
They really were. I've had the unique opportunity of looking back at some of these old cases. And of course, I've written about cases a lot older than that. I've written about cases going back to the 1930s, the Ruxton case. And I've looked at the statements, and I've looked at the telephone messages, and I've looked at the notes that detectives have written. And I thought, well done. Well done. And unfortunately, in the case of the Ruxton case, nobody's left alive that I could phone up and say, well done. You were bang on the money. Good.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
I have been able to say that to their children and their grandchildren, which the grandchildren have taken tremendous satisfaction from, that our old grandfather did a good job in this very, very important case. Isn't that nice? There is his photograph there. It's not just a black and white photograph now. It's a man. It's a character. And we know what he did. And I say, take that photograph down and write a little note on the back of it so that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren will know who he was and what he did.
Our grandchildren and great-grandchildren won't have that problem, Tom. They'll just need to bring up Crime Time Inc. on the internet.
Well, they will. And I'll make sure, because for every Christmas and birthday, they get a full copy of it. And then if there's going to be any pocket money that comes from me, they've got to answer a series of questions.
I think it's about much giving your grandchildren Ruxton. At 10 years of age, it's not going to mean that much to them, Tom.
But no, I have, and this is true, I've actually put copies of the books into envelopes addressed to them so that they can read them when they're older. And I've put a wee thing in the front of the book. This is what I was doing all these years.
Tom, by that time, reading might not be a thing anymore.
No, I don't think so.
Available in audiobook as well.
It is indeed.
Yeah. Tom, let's move on. Eventually. The second topic that I'd picked, that was serial killers, because I'm just picking topics that our deep dive team, we could never discuss the range of cases because they've just done everything.
Yeah.
And I do want to touch on the Reith lectures as well. But the one I was thinking about here was massacres, slaughters, and kidnappings. Mm-hmm. We've gone from Hungerford just recently, Pakistan. We've gone to America, to the convention in Chicago. We've gone all over the world with people slaughtering. Scandinavia as well. We had 900 deaths in Jonestown, Jim Jones in America. It's a real eye-opener, isn't it, when you and I are forced to sit and listen to it and think about the range all across the world?
We have, but they're all very different. I was thinking about common themes that linked them together, and it's very, very difficult to link Jonestown with Hungerford because they're completely different things. And of course, you talk about kidnappings, that's a very good example of how in our service, during our service, police techniques in dealing with kidnapping changed and became an awful lot more proficient. I don't know if you were involved in ever with what we used to refer to as tiger kidnapping. Are you familiar with that phrase?
No,
Right.
no.
We didn't suffer much from it in Scotland, but a tiger kidnap is where, as a good example, a bank manager's family is kidnapped. And
Yeah.
then the bank manager's told, right, we've got your wife and we've got your children. You've got to go into the bank. You've got to open the vault. You've got to do this and that and the next thing. So it's a sort of an indirect thing. And there was quite a lot of it going on in the Midlands particularly, but it spread further north. And the police in the UK developed quite good techniques for dealing specific. I'm not going to talk about them, obviously.
No.
Actually, good techniques for dealing with the phenomena of tiger kidnapping. And so much so that as a trend, it died away. Now, I'm not saying it's gone forever, and I don't want to open the papers tomorrow and see a story of one, but it just shows, coming back to what we said, and one of my big mantras is you need good people and good systems. Well, in terms of kidnapping and tiger kidnapping, we've got better systems. But coming back to massacres, the big issue at the moment for me, and there was a very, very disturbing case just reported this week where a young man was determined to go out in a blaze of glory at a school shooting. And school shootings, that seems to be the kind of the flavour of the month. And I think we've got to be very, very careful, because it doesn't have to be a gun, of course. We talk about school shootings. We should actually say school attacks, because you can do just as much damage with a machete or 2 or 3 knives amongst very young children as you can with guns. And I think we've got to be very, very careful about how we approach that. I think we've got to be careful how we report it, how we carry it in our news media, because there are all sorts of suggestible young people out there who live their lives through the internet, who are looking to make a mark. And sometimes it doesn't matter how they make the mark. They want to go out in a blaze of glory. And the young man who was sentenced there had murdered his family, has murdered his mother and 2 siblings, and was actually on his way to kill as many people at a primary school, armed with a shotgun and a considerable amount of ammunition, when he was intercepted by the police. The judge actually said, and rightly so, that the family of that boy who he murdered had actually, unbeknown to them, but they had sacrificed their lives in order to save the school children. So this phenomena of school shootings, which has been very, very common in America ever since Sandy Hook and long before Sandy Hook, and it's a regular occurrence. My worry is it's starting to come across here, or rather school attacks, because they're not only shootings. And
they don't have the same access to firearms here, thankfully, because of some of the stuff we've talked about, some of the landmark cases such as Dunblane that have restricted the access to firearms in this country.
Although this young man last week who was sentenced, he'd actually found a loophole in that, because he'd managed to create the facsimile of a shotgun certificate just by a photocopying process. As we speak, there are measures being taken to make sure that that is tightened up and that cannot happen. So you will not be able to have a private transfer of shotgun without first notifying the authorities. Because as it stands just now, if I have a shotgun and a shotgun certificate, and my next door neighbour has a shotgun certificate, I can simply, by signing the back of the form, I can transfer my gun to him. And that has shown to be deficient, and that'll have to be tightened up.
Can be abused. A couple of things there, Tom. I'd never heard the term tiger kidnappings, but we had a big one when I was in the surveillance unit in Glasgow. We were called out early in the morning because a family had been taken hostage, and it was to do with the transport of money and whatnot. It was a whole day operation, culminating in a shooting in a graveyard, and not a shooting, a shootout in a cemetery. But the family, we eventually had a seize. We'd put a cordon round a high block of flats in Glasgow, and we were waiting. We had the place, and the negotiating was going on, and they gave up. I think I said this during, it might have been season 2 or 3, that they gave up, the kidnappers gave up about 6:10, because it transpired they just wanted to see themselves on the 6 o'clock news. Well, that was a tiger kidnapping.
That's right. A tiger kidnapping is defined as where somebody is kidnapped so as to bring pressure on somebody else for gain. And
Yeah.
as I say, traditionally it's been the bank manager or someone like that. But it could
Yeah.
equally be somebody
Or
who's...
children. It used to
Yes.
be children of rich people,
Yes,
famous
that's right.
people.
Yeah. Or equally, it can be for drugs or whatever the commodity
Yeah.
is. But that's the essence of it. It's not the kidnapping of the principal, but kidnapping of someone who can bring pressure upon the
Yeah.
principal. Yeah.
We've got lots of listeners across the water in the USA, Tom. We've also got lots of listeners in Australia, especially in Queensland and in Brisbane. So hello to them. And they always seem, any comments we get from them, and we could do with more, it always seems to be this fascination with, especially from Americans, understanding how we're not armed here in this country routinely.
Yeah.
And we had one during the week that I think was a friend of yours that messaged us. Remember I sent it to you?
Yes.
From me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
was she at the wind up, was she?
I think she was testing her system to make sure that what she was said was going through. She was wanting to see whether the website worked.
Right. So she'd left a voice message which comes through in the form of an email. So for anybody wanting to do that, it's a great facility. Just click on it on our crimetimeinc.com website and leave us a wee message. It's always good to hear from people, Tom, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But funnily enough, about going unarmed, when I was working in America, a lot of my colleagues, American colleagues, simply could not believe that we went unarmed. Yeah. And they thought I was a wind-up. And of course, I was perhaps a little mischievous because I had done quite a lot of pistol shooting as a young man, as a boy. And so I wasn't a bad shot. Well, still not a bad shot, I'd like to think, but I wasn't a bad shot. And so when we went out in the ranges, and of course it was obligatory to go out on the ranges, firearms training and tactical awareness was an obligatory course. When I went out and did that, of course I could shoot quite well. And this, of course, added to the suspicions.
Yes, yeah.
And one or two of them would come up to me and say, tell me the truth. Tell me the truth. And I said, no, honestly. I said, listen, come and visit us. Especially the guys from Texas. They simply couldn't believe how we could do our job.
No, because firearms are so intrinsic to the policing, aren't they? And the public expect that as well. I remember going over to Ireland. The first time I went to Northern Ireland, Tom, during the Troubles, we got picked up at the airport and taken in. We got stopped at a roadblock and then waved through. And I remember seeing the tanks going up the middle of the street with the soldiers out the turret with firearms, with rifles pointed at the pavement as they were driving up the street. And to me, this was incredible. But to everybody else in the town or village or city that we were going through, it was perfectly normal.
Yeah.
So people just become accustomed to what's going on round about them, don't they?
Well, they do. And I mean, that's a danger because there's an awful lot more armed police officers on the streets now than when we joined. An awful lot.
Yeah.
An awful lot. And I think we've got to watch that there's not a creep of the arming of the police, because I think it's to our great advantage that the police service in the UK is still community-based, unarmed, who go about their business, their normal duty, in that way. Now, of course, we've got stab-resistant vests and all the rest of it, which we didn't have in the early days. The conversations I've had with the senior officers who run Police Scotland just now, they are of a similar mind. It's the last thing they want to do is to arm any more police officers, because, of course, that just begats violence. Because if every police officer's armed, then any criminal worth his salt's going, well, you know, I've got to get myself some protection or I'm going to get shot. And that's exactly the mindset of knife carrying, which is such a big problem in some parts of our country, where young people, young men particularly, feel they have got to carry a knife to defend themselves because they're pretty sure that everybody else is going to be carrying a knife. And that, of course, is a cycle of despair and destruction.
It's interesting, Tom, that you still have conversations with senior police officers and you've been retired for so long now. But the only conversation I have with senior police officers now generally starts with, you're not obliged to say anything, but anything you do say. Or, do you not still owe me X amount from Tully Allen back in 1992?
Or do you have a license to beg?
You're getting the gist.
Yeah.
Good, Tom. It's good to keep your finger on the pulse, though, isn't it? And I love speaking to cops because I do still know a few serving cops and still have contacts, and it's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's great. You can't get a smile off your face because you're not part of it anymore, of course.
Well, funnily enough, I was out at a thing just last week, actually. I'm part of the Edinburgh Lothian Borders Police Historical Society, and we had a little stand up in Leith Street, Leith Walk, which is an ancient street in Edinburgh between Edinburgh and Leith. And we had one of our colleagues dressed up in a World War II uniform. It was a precursor to the bombing of Edinburgh and Leith, the book that's coming out on the 1st of May.
Yep.
And there were a couple of young cops came up, serving officers from today. And we were standing in the street. And of course, as people are coming by, I'm saying to them, "Good morning, what are you doing? How are you doing? Do you recognise this fellow?" Pointing to the World War II policeman. And I'm saying to older people, "Listen, you've been arrested once or twice by these people." And the young officers actually said to us both, they said, "It's incredible how you speak to everybody in the street." And I said, "Well, that's how we were taught. We were taught on the beat to make eye contact and to speak to everybody. And I mean everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's just a word. How you doing? Yeah, nice morning.
Yes.
What are you up to? Good to see you. Dear, blah, blah, blah." It doesn't matter. That's how we were taught. And a lot of that's gone, not due to the fact that the officers wouldn't like to do it, but just due to the competing demands and the demands of all the things like cybercrime and things like that we thankfully didn't have to deal with.
And they don't have a beat anymore. A wee extension of that, Tom, that you were saying, and you know this, that on your beat, you see a stranger that you don't know, maybe a shopkeeper, publican, bookie, whatever, or just an old person sitting on a bench, whatever it might be, and you say good morning, and generally they nod to the uniform anyway. It's not you, it's the uniform that gets morning officer or whatever it might be. Some people ask you the time just to speak to you, just to get a wee natter. But the next day or 2 or 3 days later, he's there again and you say hello. And then there's a wee conversation probably. I say, "It's a nice day today." And within a week or two, you're chatting away to these people and they're telling you things that are going on. They're telling you their worries. You're getting all the local problems and you become part of that community quite quickly if you take the time to say good morning.
Mm-hmm. I was taught to work the beat by a master of the craft. And he worked his beat, and he had dozens and dozens of informants round the beat, and none of them knew they were informants, but they were.
Yes, yeah. And an integral part of what we were doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, let's move on. Finally, I had written down the third topic, because these are the big themes, and I'd mentioned the Reith lecture there. I'll just touch on that briefly. That was 4 episodes of Crime Time Inc., because you and I were both invited through to Dundee. You couldn't manage that night. But these were lectures about evil and about the factors that make people commit horrific crimes like they do, and whether we could intervene at an earlier stage. The Reith lectures were very interesting, weren't they?
They were super, and you'll still get them on the BBC iPlayer or through Crime Time Inc., because we carried them as well. They were very, very thought-provoking, very, very interesting. And as you see these notorious cases coming up in the paper, then, you can actually cross-refer and you think, oh, yeah, that's where that's happening. So it was very good indeed.
Assassinations, Tom, was a big part of it. We didn't have one every week, but we'd one every couple of weeks, because it is a big phenomenon. And they have an effect worldwide, don't they? The big assassinations, I can still remember, I was sitting on a bus the day I heard that John Lennon had been killed in New York. Mm-hmm. And they say, maybe that was the birth of that saying, you'll never forget what you were doing when you heard. The JFK assassination, or the landing on the moon was another one. These big assassinations, Martin Luther King, Lee Harvey Oswald, of course, and Robert Kennedy. It was a great subject to cover across the piece, because you start to see patterns there, don't you? And you start to see of conspiracies. They become subjects for every Tom, Dick and Harry to throw their tuppence worth in and start making up stuff, especially the internet. That's just fueled that totally.
Yeah, of course it has. The conspiracy theories round about John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were well advanced long before the internet. And of course, interestingly, as we speak, just this week that we're actually speaking, the last of the files on JFK have actually been released. And there was all this hubbub before about how it would show this and show that, and it's all gone quiet now. Do you notice? Because actually, there's nothing new in them.
No.
The thing about these cases, if you look at JFK, RFK, and Martin Luther King, they're all very, very different crimes in completely different circumstances. But there's a learning point, and that is that one of the reasons why we do not have as many successful assassinations as we used to have, and these were all the 1960s, all these cases were a cluster in the 1960s, is because our systems, back to systems again, our systems of protection are an awful lot better. Now, of course, the one outlier in that is the recent attempt to assassinate Donald Trump while he was on the campaign trail. But when you look at that, you actually see that he was not fully protected as a candidate that he would have been as an office holder. And if you look at the three of them, if you look at John Kennedy, Dallas, that was an absolute catastrophic breakdown in planning and security, both by the security service, the Secret Service, and by the Dallas police. There had been threats made against Kennedy in Dallas. It was not all that popular. He was down there to try and turn the tide for the Democrats down there. He was down there at the invitation of Connolly, the governor, to try and do this thing. But for him to be paraded in a slow convoy in an open-topped car through a densely populated area where there was all kinds of overlooking buildings and things was nothing short of just ridiculous. It was completely stupid. You would never allow that now in these circumstances. It was just absolutely daft. And as for the subsequent assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby, well, I mean, the Dallas Police Department parading a suspect like that in open, with a mob of people round about them. I mean, it was like watching something out of comic cuts. It was just so ridiculous. It wasn't true. Now, going on to RFK, RFK was just bad luck because he shouldn't have been in the lobby where he was when he was shot. He should have gone another way, and he decided to cut through the kitchens. And he ended up in this crowded hallway, and the assassin ended up right close in front of him. That was a piece of very, very bad luck. And in terms of Martin Luther King, well, Martin Luther King should have had better security, but he was on an open balcony, and a balcony that he used to frequent. So anybody who wanted to take a pot shot at Martin Luther King knew that if they stayed there long enough, they would get a shot at him.
Yeah. Tom, just to wrap up our season 3 review, one of the disappointments for me, and the deep dive team, I think, were remiss. It was the one thing that I would criticise them for over the piece of season 3, which has been our longest season because of the daily podcasts that they were doing. Yeah. And we've now got a fantastic back catalogue. Is that Paul McCartney didn't come up during the course of that. I thought they might have brought his name up for me that I could tell my story. Because I think we've got a lot of new listeners now that will be wondering what this Paul McCartney story is.
No, I don't think they will. But I noticed you did sneak in John Lennon there, and I thought that was a hook for you to get your Paul McCartney story. Simon, I think everybody knows your Paul McCartney story. I think the tragedy is that you don't have any other stories to tell apart from Paul McCartney. Dreadful.
So I'm going to have a word with our new deep dive team that are going to be doing Charles Manson. So, Tom, what are you thinking?
Obviously, for comparison, I listen to quite a lot of true crime podcasts, and I haven't heard any, and I'm not blowing Crime Time Inc.'s trumpet, but I haven't heard anybody or anyone that has the range that we have, and I think that's good. And the feedback I'm getting from people that listen to it say, that was really interesting about, witch hunting in the 16th century, or about the Australian backpacker case, things like that. I didn't know anything about these cases. I said, well, that's good. Excellent.
Tom, let's finish off. Give us a wee update on your book release. It's the 1st of May, is that right?
Yes, the bombing of Edinburgh and Leith, 1st of May, and of course the celebrations across the nation to remember that fantastic generation that stood the test. And it's interesting that we perhaps will have to stand the test again in the not too distant future against aggressive nations who seek to overwhelm us and seek to threaten our way of life. And it's the 80th anniversary, of course, of the end of the war. But my book is going to be about the period from 1939 to 1942, where the fair city of Edinburgh came under sustained Luftwaffe attack. And I've got some fantastic crime scene standard photographs. I've got wonderful text from the time, the official reports, which is, of course, very, very downplayed. And I've got some amusing little incidents as well to come from it. So it's going to be interesting. And the book is at the printers as we speak, and will be there in plenty time for the 1st of May and the launch of The Bombing of Edinburgh and Leith. Available through Ringwood, our old friends, Ringwood Publishers. Yep. And it's going to be on Amazon. Yep.
Just this week, Tom, we lost John Paddy Hemingway,
Yep.
the last survivor of the Battle of Britain, the last pilot, aged 105.
I know.
Quite a character. I was watching some of the footage of him and whatnot. He was quite a character over
I
the
know.
years.
I know. I mean, and he said, luck. It's all about luck.
Yeah.
And he'd been shot down 4 times and survived.
Right. Yeah.
And he said his flight commander was the finest pilot he ever knew, a wonderful pilot, shot down and killed. Just luck.
Yes.
And they've got tremendous humility, all of them, who just say, look, I'm not the hero. The heroes are people that didn't make it. Don't say that. They're really uncomfortable about it. And,
can I ask you, Tom, how thick your book is? How many words is your book?
I haven't done a word count. I don't know, but it's an A4 book, so it's a coffee table book, for people that have coffee tables.
Well, that's interesting, because that's why I'm asking. My coffee table's got a bit wobbly. I don't know what's happening. I'm looking for something to hold it up. I think it might just do the job.
No, I'll tell you what, let me think of that. The 10%, I would recommend that. All you need to do is rip some pages out of it to adjust it to the height. And you can use these pages in the WC, if you...
Tom, I think we'll leave it there.
I think we should. I think we should leave it there. With that thought, I think we should
We'll get a chat.
Yeah.
Next time we speak, it'll be about Charles Manson and the first episode that's out on Wednesday this coming week. So look forward to that, and look forward to chatting to you about it, a whole new subject.
Yeah, indeed. You take care, Simon. Okay.
You too. All the best.
Bye-bye.